$250. That's how much my sane mental state is worth to me, apparently. About 2 years ago, I was a little low on money. Not dangerously so, but enough where I was looking for a little extra. So, when I saw that a science company called Visions was offering $250 for non-dangerous tests and samples, I almost immediately signed up. I had to go to a random small building in my city. It's one I walk past all the time, but never really take any notice of. I occasionally see the doors open and people inside. I think it's just a generic building for businesses to rent out for a day. It was my first time inside, and it consisted of just 2 rooms. The larger room that you entered into was full of chairs. The door I walked through was propped open, and on the opposite wall was another door, closed. There were only 3 other people sat down. I took a seat and waited. I thought I had gotten off pretty well. I expected to be there for at least an hour, probably closer to 2 hours. But after 10 minutes of waiting, the closed doors opened, and my name was called. I made my way into the smaller of the 2 rooms. It felt very medical. There was a desk, with a man sitting behind it, and a woman sat in the corner of the room. Next to the desk was a box with smaller boxes inside. One was labeled gloves, and another syringes. I didn't closely look at the other labels before the man spoke to me. "Please, take a seat. Do you have any questions? Do you need a glass of water? I hope we didn't keep you waiting too long." I sat across from him at this clearly cheap fold-away desk. Despite the sign-up claiming this to be non-dangerous, I still asked, "Is this going to be dangerous?" "No, not at all. That being said, there are a few legal things we need to go over." I think the woman saw I looked a little concerned, as she spoke up.
"It's all just boring stuff. Honestly, the law makes everything boring."
She laughed, and I faintly let out a fake quiet chuckle. The man looked briefly at something written on paper, and then spoke again. "So, we're going to be collecting a few skin cells. We'll give you something to numb the pain, and then use a razor to collect a small section off the top layer of your skin. Are you okay with needles?" "I'm okay with needles. A razor taking off my skin sounds a little harsher, though." He smiled. "Please, it's just the wording. It'll be from the top of your arm, and frankly, even without the numbing, it wouldn't hurt a whole lot. With the numbing, you won't feel a thing. Plus, it'll heal in days." I felt more reassured. "Okay. Is that all the legal stuff?" "Oh, no. The main thing is we need your consent for what we'll be using the skin cells for." "And what will that be?" "We're experimenting with growing human brains, without using any tissue directly from the brain. We're seeing how we can use different cells to clone entirely different organs." I figured this must be for safer and more common organ transplant surgeries. I wish I had asked what exactly the brains would be used for. Instead, I asked, "Sounds interesting. So, will it be an exact replica of my brain?" "Exactly. Well, maybe. Theoretically, yes. It'll be a brain wired the exact same way as yours. Cloning an organ is usually like taking a blueprint for a computer and rebuilding it. Except in our case, we aren't taking the exact blueprint for the exact computer. It's more like we're taking a different blueprint from the same library and using it to figure out other blueprints. I was a little confused, but confident enough in my understanding. Because you're not using my actual brain cells. You're using my skin cells to predict what my brain cells are like.
He gets it.
The woman said whilst cheering. The man laughed and pretended to celebrate too. The atmosphere had been lifted greatly, and I was given a contract to sign. Within 5 minutes, it was over, and I was out, with my money. Within an hour, I could feel my arm again, and the area of skin that they had shaved off only stung a little. Within a week, it was completely healed. It was as if I had never even been. After that, months went past. A whole year went past. I hardly ever thought about my time donating those skin cells. Once or twice, I told the story to family or friends, and some of them thought it was odd. How do you know you're not a clone? Was a joke made all too much. A year ago. That is when the thoughts began. Thoughts in my head that were not my own. The thing is, these weren't bad thoughts. They weren't really anything. They were just thoughts that felt separate from mine, but happening in my own head all the same. The thoughts weren't clear. I couldn't make them out. I could just feel my brain faintly working in the background. A feeling I don't quite think I could ever describe in such a way that would capture it for anyone else. Focusing on the thoughts didn't help. It just hurt. It was like trying to listen to a conversation from across the street, with busy traffic between you. A month went by like this. I didn't tell anyone. That's when, for the first time, I could make out one of the thoughts. It was an equation. D equals the square root of x1 minus x2 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. I could clearly and vividly imagine the equation. I couldn't hear it or see it. These were not external hallucinations. These were clearly thoughts in my own head. Foreign thoughts that I could not control. I was not a numbers guy. I didn't know much about math or computing at all. Yet, when I looked this up, it was a real formula. It calculates the distance between 2 points. I was convinced that I had never heard this equation in my life. But I calmed myself down. I wasn't having visions. No. I must have learnt this back in school, and it's gone to the back of my mind. I was wrong. As time went on, so did the thoughts. All sorts of math and scientific theories, ones I had never heard of. You may have noticed my wording of, I was not a numbers guy. Well, that's because I am now. This constant flow of information integrated itself slowly into my own thoughts. My brain became a container for information, and I was learning so much. I got comfortable with it. and learned to block out all of the noise in my own thoughts. I learned to be one with the knowledge. I didn't question it too much. I know that seems odd, but once it started helping me, I just didn't care anymore. It felt nice that I had a database of information, not even at my fingertips, but at the literal synapses of my brain. I'm not all-knowing. I am not fed all information about everything ever, but I am a lot smarter than I used to be. Then came the voices. The voices were shocking. I woke up about 3 months ago, and I could hear the voices of people talking. Only every now and then. It wasn't constant. But I remember so vividly the first things I heard. 2 people talking.
I wonder if it's conscious.
Of course it is. It might not understand us yet, but it's certainly conscious.
I guess we'll find out how much it understands when we hook it up completely. The other ones were...
The last sentence got quieter with each word, and was interrupted by the sound of a door slamming shut. These voices occurred multiple times a week, usually on a weekday. Saturday and Sunday were rarer, but it happened. It was almost always people talking about vague, cryptic nonsense. Some random sentences I remember are, "The 4th dimension is gonna be the end of us before we can utilize it. I swear." Do you think anyone in Sonder has figured anything out? We got another one from Beyond Perception. It's becoming more frequent. I've been trying to piece all of this together. I can't. I'm missing too much of the puzzle to even try. But last week, I got another piece. I dreamt that I was in a jar full of water. I couldn't move or even look around. My vision was fixed in place, but I could see other jars nearby. 3 of them, with a brain inside. After minutes of staring at this, a woman came into my field of view. The same woman who had been sitting in the corner of that skin cell donation room. This was the first time that it clicked what had happened. I've been understanding the thoughts and perceptions of my cloned brain. The other brain jars had wires sticking out of them. I couldn't look up, but I can only assume mine did too. My best guess is that they cloned my brain and are trying to use it as some sort of computer to calculate equations and understand the world better than any human. They just didn't expect some of that information to leak back to the source. It was at this point that I jolted awake from the shock. I caught my breath and concentrated. There I was again, without even dreaming. I was back in that jar. Yet, at the same time, I could see multiple other places. I was viewing so many different perspectives at once, mostly inside the Vision's HQ. It's like I was inside the camera system. I could see a room of people sitting at desks, typing. I could see a small seaside village. I could see a room that was empty, all apart from a table and a tall gray creature stretched out on top. The creature was cut open, with organs spilling out of it that you wouldn't see in any human or animal. I can see so much whenever I close my eyes. Every day it changes. Every day it's something horrific. Today, I can see a man sat on a chair. He's just sat, whilst there are bodies on the floor around him. inside out. They have no skin. They're dead. I cannot contact visions. They won't answer me. I can only see the horrors that go on inside. This company is messed up. I want them to unplug the brain. I want them to kill it. I think it's helping them automate their systems. But that's my brain. They are using me to run their diabolical research. I don't care what it does to me. I need them to unplug it. I need them to stop it. They have no idea that they're using me. They have no idea that I can see them. They have no idea that I'm in their systems. I try every day to control my other brain, and I feel like I'm getting closer. I'll take them down from the inside when I can. Until then, I can only watch. Until then, I have to accept that I am no longer just myself. I am visions. It all started with a deafening crash against my front door. It was 10 p.m., and I was in bed, trying to get to sleep. The sound sent me flying out of bed and clambering into my wardrobe, clutching a steak knife I kept hidden in my coat pocket. It wasn't because of anxiety or paranoia. It's because I live in Garland Estates, one of the roughest areas in Bradford, the most dangerous city in Europe. Only the worst kinds of stories are told here. Old ladies stabbed for their groceries. Children starving as their parents shoot up. Death, desperation, and decay lurking behind every door. Where are the police, you might ask? Good question. They lack the manpower and the empathy to bother with estates like Garland. 28,866 crimes were committed in the city last year. The most common being violent offenses. You could call 999 with a knife sticking out of your chest, and you still wouldn't make their priority list. You'd just become another statistic. I hid in the wardrobe for another 10 minutes before plucking enough courage to peer out the window. My bedroom was right next to the front door, so I could always check on who was out there. But that night, it was pitch black. Just a few squares of distant light coming from the windows on the other side of the estate. Most of the flats were deserted. All 3 buildings had been sold to developers over the summer. They planned to tear the whole place down and start again. I've got just a few weeks to find a new place. Not that I care. Garland Estates is a place of last resort. In my case, it was a nasty ex-coke habit and a nasty ex-husband. I don't know what I'll do next. But one thing is for sure. I'd rather be homeless than spend another night in this place of rot. The next evening, there was a knock at the door. A hurried rat-tat-tat that cut through the silence of the house like a machine gun. I held my breath and switched off my phone, hiding in the darkness. Like my mom always said, you only get bad news after 9 p.m. The motion-controlled hallway light switched on, casting white light through the fabric of my curtains. I remained motionless, staring at the distorted shadows cast against my wall. There wasn't the usual shadow of someone standing by the door, but there was a second knock. This one even faster. I pulled the duvet over my head, crushing it against my face. Maybe if I tried hard enough, I'd disappear. The hallway light switched back off, and I thought maybe I had. Total darkness. I slowly leant upwards, straining my neck and listening for any noises from outside. It was silent, but only for a moment. A frustrated thud rang out from the door. It was short and sharp, sending me back under the covers. I don't remember falling asleep. I kept the knife under my pillow, just in case. It started again the next night, but I was already prepared. In the dark, knife in my hand. There was a knock at the door. The hallway light switched on, but this time, there was a voice. It was stern, but polite, southern and a bit posh. She called me by my full name. She was with the police. They needed to come in and talk. My father had been in a serious accident. If you were in my shoes, you'd probably answer the door. The problem was, my dad had died when I was 6. He'd overdosed at his friend's house. I never visited the grave. Another knock. The voice was getting frustrated, but tried to hide it beneath professional politeness. I was desperate to take a look, to see who was out there. But the curtains would be too obvious. They'd see I was in there, and the knocking would never stop. The only way to get a good look at them without arousing suspicion would be to check through the peephole. I crept out of bed and shuffled into the hallway, avoiding the stark light. There was another knock at the door. I froze on my hands and knees, stuck in the prayer position. The woman pleaded that I come to the door and talk to her. She knew I was in there. Cautiously, I rose to my feet, my gaze fixed on the peephole. I leaned forward, aligning my eye with the small lens. My vision was warped by a hairline crack in the lens that broke the hallway into jagged fragments. I imagined a stern face looking back at me, with sharp features and piercing yet gentle eyes. But there was no one. The hallway was completely deserted, except for a single leaf blowing in the breeze. I prayed that the police officer had just given up and left, that there was an answer to all of this. For the rest of the night, I sat bolt upright, gently rubbing the jagged blade of the steak knife across my knuckles. The occasional thud against the door kept me awake until the morning. I called the police, and they told me there were no records of sending an officer to my address. The voice explained that it was probably some kids pulling a stupid prank. I furiously disagreed, demanding they send someone out. The voice let out a long and hopeless sigh, and I threw the phone against the wall. When the knocking came again, I screamed at it to leave me alone. A lilting Irish voice came through the door. It was my neighbor from across the estate. A young guy with gormless eyes but a nice smile. We'd spoken a few times in the battered lift on the way to work, chatting about the weather and the sorry state of the place. His voice was high-pitched, anxious. He apologized for calling on me so late, but someone had been knocking at his door for the past few nights, and he wanted to know if it had also happened to me. I crept into the hallway and, against my better judgment, told him that I had. He thanked God, told me he'd tried calling the police, but they'd fobbed him off. I felt a rush of relief. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't going crazy. Or at least, I wouldn't be alone in my insanity. He asked if he could come inside so we could make a plan together. But when I looked through the peephole, all I saw was black. My stomach dropped. I asked if he was covering the lens. He told me that there was some kind of black substance wiped across my door, like tarmac. Every door in the estate was covered in it. He began to sound panicked again, knocking on the door. He called out my name, begging to be let in, convinced that something was out there with him, moving in the shadows. His voice cracked with desperation, but something didn't add up. As hard as I tried, I didn't remember ever telling him my name. I left him begging at the door and crept back into my bedroom. I crawled to the curtains and gently pulled them aside, desperate to see my lanky, lovable neighbor standing outside. But under the flickering fluorescent light of the hallway, there was nothing. The light switched off with a click, plunging me into darkness. 3 loud slams rattled my front door. 1, 2, 3, then silence. When the sun rose the next day, I knew I wouldn't be able to leave the house. I couldn't trust the outside. Between the hours of sleepless nights and the adrenaline pumping through my veins, my reality was crumbling before my eyes. I shuffled around my dingy flat in a disassociated state, deciding whether it really was daytime or if I was going insane. I accidentally poured boiling water over my hand while trying to make a cup of tea. It took a few seconds for me to notice, and by then, it was too late. Bloated blisters erupted across the top of my hand, yellow and full of pus. As I stared down at the mess, a numbness settled over me, not just in my boiled skin, but deep within. The smashed remains of my phone ruled out any chance of calling the police. Even if I could call them, would I dare do it? How could I know it was really them? Whatever was knocking at my door had to die. I couldn't live like this for much longer. I'd already considered the alternative. It would be easy to climb out the back window and enjoy a few seconds of wind rushing through my hair, followed by eternal darkness. It was decided. This was going to be the final night I heard the knocking, one way or the other. I sat in the hallway, wrapped in my thick duvet, knife in my hand, ready to lash out at whatever appeared behind the door. There was a knock. I placed my hand on the door handle, ready to swing it open and attack. But something stopped me. The hallway light remained extinguished. A voice came from the other side of the door. Its words were timid, barely above a whisper. A little boy. He told me that his dad was drunk and had locked him out of his flat. He was scared, tired. My heart thundered in my chest as I screamed at him to go away, pleaded that he leave and never return. He asked if I could call his mom. It was way past his bedtime, and he had school in the morning. It was so dark out there. I told him to jump up and down to activate the hallway light. He was probably too small to be detected, but I couldn't trust something I didn't see. He didn't want to, said that he was too tired. I slammed my fist against the door and screamed my demands. He began to cry and told me he was doing it. Pressing my ear to the door, I strained to listen for the sound of little feet hitting the concrete of the ground outside. There was nothing, except for the boy's sobs. I hissed and told the boy to shut up. His sobs became quiet murmurs, but I still couldn't hear any movement outside. It remained dark. I had never seen any children in Garland Estates. No one in their right mind would raise a child in this awful place. Whatever was outside my door, it was not a little boy. It was my tormentor. It needed to die. As the boy begged to be let inside, I crept back up and began to pull down the handle. It only took a second for me to yank the door open and leap out, slashing at the darkness with my knife. I screamed, ready to feel the knife rip into something, anything, even if it was the boy. At least it would prove that there was something at my door. My blade flew through the air as I toppled out into the hallway. I slammed into the floor, crushing my blistered hand under my chest. The knife slipped, and its jagged metal ran through the soft flesh beneath my collarbone. The side of my head impacted the concrete, and I crumpled into a heap in the middle of the hallway. My entire body erupted in pain. I screamed as the light switched on, and the mess I had made was bathed in white light. The hallway was barren. The only sound was the whistling of the wind and my screams turning hoarse by the second. Even if someone did hear me, they were probably too terrified to come up and see. I rolled backwards, pushing myself back into the doorway. I kicked the door shut. The entire time, I stared down at the knife sticking out of my chest. I've locked myself in my bedroom. My duvet is stained with blood and pus. I haven't stopped crying. It's not because of the pain. It's not because there wasn't anything there. Because there was something. I just couldn't see it. When I opened the door, I'd let it in. Now, it's knocking on my bedroom door, begging to come closer. An anomaly is defined as anything that deviates from the expected, normal, or standard. This is quite a wide definition. An ant, being slightly stronger than most others of its species, is an anomaly. But so is something that breaks our perception of reality. Something that goes against everything we've ever known, bringing the nature of existence into question, is an anomaly. Something to be studied. When it gets swept away, unexplained, however much the anomaly has affected your life, you begin to feel a lot like that ant. Insignificant. My sister is an anomaly now. It started with a simple complaint about her hand feeling strange, a tingling sensation. The doctors almost flat out refused to do anything. I want to be angry, but then I remember telling her my own thoughts. It's nothing. Everyone gets weird feelings. It'll pass. It's what everyone told her. I suppose we thought we were reassuring her. Then, the next symptom began. We awoke to her screaming, over and over. My hand is drooping. My hand is drooping. Without any context, what does that even mean? She knew exactly what it meant. She was the only one living this nightmare. Nobody could quite understand what she felt. I burst into her room seconds before our parents did the same. There she knelt, on her bed, with the fingers of her right hand about twice as long as usual. I can feel them, she cried. They're trying to continue. My mother flipped on the lights, perhaps hoping that our eyes deceived us in the dark. The middle of the night, in a very dim light, it seems to teeter right on the edge of reality. It's the perfect condition to conjure up an illusion of the mind. Yet this, right here, was as real as you. Her hand was stretched. My mother immediately dialed the emergency services, whilst my father went into comfort mode. Hey, it's all right. Are you feeling okay? My sister sat for a moment, staring at her hand. Her breathing remained constantly heavy. In the background, I could hear my mother on the phone, although I wasn't paying much attention.
Yes, twice as long. She was asleep. No, I don't know how.
I feel. She paused, perhaps focusing on the feeling, deciding whether or not she felt okay. How would she even describe okay in this moment? Long. My father and I glanced at each other for a moment. Was that meant to be a joke? I smiled awkwardly. What does that mean? She got up from her bed, making it slowly apparent to all of us that she was taller. Not by much, maybe an inch or two, but in the context of human height overnight, that's a lot. The room fell silent. I think I could make out the operator on the other side of the phone trying to see if my mother was still there. Physically, she was, but mentally, I think she was just worried for her daughter. What's happening to me? Her voice broke slightly. It broke all of us along with it. To sound so dazed and lost about your own self is heartbreaking. It was the last time I saw her with any description of human emotion. She lunged towards my mother in the doorway, not to hurt her, just to leave the room. Although, with all the urgency she had in her movement, I don't believe she would have cared if she had hurt anybody on the way out. We all called out for her, but she didn't turn back around. She didn't speak. She just ran through the house. Leaving the light of her room, she blended into the shadows. I don't know if my mind deceived me, but I swear I saw her hit her head on the ceiling multiple times, as if she was growing further. Each time she did, she grunted with pain, as if using a voice that was not her own. Each of us, only seeing her from the corner of our eyes, had managed to lose her in our own home. My father searched around upstairs, whilst my mother, still on the phone, started wandering the street outside. Catching a glimpse of something out the back window of the kitchen, I stepped outside. I was afraid of what I might be walking into. What nightmare could be waiting for me? I decided that, whatever it was, I owe it to my sister to join her in this. Slowly, I made my way towards the movement. She had wrapped herself around a tree in the garden, one we used to climb as kids. She spoke something that I could only just make out over the sound of my own heart pounding. Everything is long. Her voice, raspy and weak, frightened me. Her black hair, usually down to her shoulders, now found its way down to the floor. I couldn't see her fully in the night, but the moonlight allowed me to see her vague shape. She was elongated, more so than before. My voice shook as I spoke, trying to calm her. We'll fix this. I held out my hand. For a moment, I thought she might hold out her own. Maybe she would have, if the sirens weren't so loud. An ambulance at the front of the house caught her attention as she let go of the tree, her snake-like limbs falling to the ground as she made her way over the fence. They never caught her. We never found her. Her funeral was held a month later. It's been 3 years. I still live in the same home. Her bedroom is almost exactly as it was. We keep her door open. Sometimes, as I walk past, I imagine her, sat in her bed. Her body is back to its regular self. I'm okay now, she'll say. You helped me. But it's a mirage, a trick of the mind. My sister as herself is no longer real. Is she still out there, stretched? I got my answer last night. Unable to sleep, I slowly became acutely aware of a tapping noise. I don't know how long it had been going before my mind allowed it to be perceived. Seconds, minutes, hours? I suppose it doesn't matter. Once I had heard it, it stayed. 5 taps, rhythmically pattering against my window. Behind the curtain. Sick of the noise, I got up, ready to see tree branches blowing in the wind. Instead, I saw 5 long fingers extending from below my vision. The palm of the hand seemed just on the edge of what I could see. A face, beginning halfway up the window and continuing far below, looked in at me. The eyes were long, with the open mouth being even longer. This was unmistakably my sister's face. Whether or not it's my sister is another question. I stood there for a moment, recoiling, but not making a sound. Her appearance is not what scared me the most. My hand began to tingle. Recently, I saw a viral post about crows leaving gifts for people, and it reminded me of something that happened when I was a kid. No one believed me then, but after seeing that viral story, maybe someone will now. When I was young, my friend Madison taught me all about crows. She used to leave peanuts and table scraps on her windowsill for them each morning. And when we met up to walk to the bus stop, the birds would sometimes follow her, cawing. She had names for all of them, but her favorite was the one she called Agatha. A small, hunched bird, like a scrap of shadow, with tattered tail feathers. Every morning, Agatha and the others would caw outside Madison's window until she set out food. And sometimes, when she got back from school, she'd find they'd left her things in return. Soda can tabs, pebbles, bits of foil, acorns. It's treasure to them, she told me.
They love shiny things. See how this blue button sparkles?
Or the time they left a bottle cap. I laughed and said it was garbage and was going to toss it out. But Madison told me, never ignore the gifts of crows. She took the bottle cap and all the other things and wrapped wire around each object to make a sort of charm bracelet, which she wore everywhere. Other kids teased her, but I always thought it was sweet. How she had such a bond with the birds. Then, one day, she disappeared. People looked everywhere. She'd walked down the lane to the bus stop alone and never arrived at school. I was sick that week with the flu. Police canvassed the neighborhood. I still remember how the police came by and asked my parents questions. Asked about the neighbors, and my parents briefly called me out so they could talk with me about the route Madison and I took to the bus stop. That was when I learned she was missing. I don't remember much about their questions, just that I sat there, bundled up in a blanket and occasionally coughing, stunned, and feeling like it must all be some terrible joke. And any moment now, Madison would be at my window knocking and asking me to play. The police advised my parents not to allow me to walk alone to the bus stop anymore. I heard a caw and glanced at the window. A crow was perched in a tree outside. Will they find her? I asked my mom, even though I knew she had no answers. No one did. The days passed, and there was no trace of Madison. And on Monday, my mom drove me to school. It seemed I would no longer be taking the bus. I convinced my mom to get some almonds, and I snuck over the small fence and up to Madison's window and put the almonds on the sill, because I figured she'd want me to feed the crows while she was gone. I still kept hoping for her, though with each day, that hope died a little more. I felt so incredibly sad for the crows, for Madison. About a week after her disappearance, I found a penny and an acorn there on the sill, and I tucked them into my pocket. A ragged, black bird perched on the fence, watching me. Its beak opened, and it cawed again. I'm sorry she isn't here to feed you. I'll try to feed you when I can. The bird's head cocked, one shiny black eye regarding me, and then it suddenly flew away. The next morning, there were no new gifts, but the crow with ragged tail feathers was there. The bird got incredibly close, seeming to try to look me right in the eye. I heard Madison's voice in my head, all those crow facts she used to spout. They're so much smarter than people realize. They can remember human faces, and they gossip if there's a bad human, and they all warn each other. And suddenly, a shiver ran down my spine. An idea needling its way into my brain. And I asked the crow, "Do you know what happened to Madison?" The crow's head turned. "Madison," I repeated. Crows could learn words. They were good mimics. I'd never heard any of Madison's crows talk, but they watched her all the time, heard me and others call her name. "Madison," I said again. The bird suddenly flew away from me, only to perch on the branches of a tree and caw. My heart pounded. The crow was leading me someplace. It was a cold, damp November day. The clouds hung low and heavy in the sky. Mom would worry if I was gone too long, but I didn't care. I hurried over the wet leaves and into the woods. Nothing mattered except finding Madison. Whether she was alive or... I didn't want to think about it. But it had been a week by that point. The crow with ragged tail feathers flew off every time I neared its perch, drawing me gradually deeper into the dark woods. Tree branches blotted out the sun, and I noticed more birds, perched like black leaves on skeletal fingers. I stopped when the crow I was following landed on the roof of a house. It was a beaten-down old house surrounded by junk. Tires. The wasted remnants of what might have once been a vegetable garden. The posts holding up the front roof on the porch were splintering. The stairs to the front door bowed, and the paint on the door peeling. A pickup truck sat in the gravel driveway that wove through the trees toward the paved street somewhere beyond. I knew this house. Or I should say, I knew of it. It belonged to a man named Crandall. But Madison and I called him the Staring Man, because apparently Madison had caught him staring at her once or twice when she walked past his property. It was because of her remarks about this that my parents and hers made us walk to the bus stop together. But we didn't really know much about him, other than that he was a recluse and looked like he was in his 30s. As far as anyone knew, he was law-abiding and had no criminal record. I didn't like him. But police must have already questioned him and found nothing, because I saw smoke drifting from his chimney. The bird eyed me. Its compatriots, perched in the trees around us, also looked down at me. I felt certain they had led me here. But there was nothing I could do on my own. So I rushed back home and burst through the front door and announced to my parents I knew who'd taken Madison. They contacted the police, but when I told the cops about the crows leading me to Crandall's house, they burst out laughing at me. "Kid, they probably just wanted you to feed them," said the cop who seemed to be in charge. He assured me Crandall's property had been thoroughly searched. My parents apologized for wasting their time, and after I retreated to my room, I heard them all speaking in hushed voices about how kids work through this stuff in their own ways. There was only one thing left to do. I had to go and find Madison myself. The next day was a Saturday, and my parents usually slept in on weekends, meaning I'd have at least a few hours before they'd come searching for me. I got up early and slipped my shoes and coat on and went out. The faint red and pink of dawn spread through the sky as the sun rose behind the trees. As usual, I'd brought some food for the crows. I'd even tried to make a necklace of their gifts for me, though I wasn't as artistic as Madison. I saw several crows in her yard, waiting for me. I told them good morning and scattered peanuts for them, and said Madison's name several times, loudly. And then I crossed the yard and went into the woods, taking the route the crows had shown me before. Crandall's house was a good hike away, and it took some time before I at last arrived in the right area. As soon as I saw the dilapidated beige siding, I slowed, suddenly very aware of how loud my crunching steps were through the fallen leaves. A few crows watched me. I didn't even know if these were Madison's crows, or different ones. The woods were full of them this time of year. I didn't see the ragged tail feathers of the only one I could recognize, the one Madison called Agatha. But even if they were different crows, it still made me feel better to have them around, and I touched the necklace for good luck. Carefully, keeping one eye on the door to the house in case the staring man should step out, I began to search. I looked up. Disheveled tail feathers. As hunched as ever, Agatha watched me from a branch, cawed, and took off. My heart raced. I followed the bird. We ventured deeper into the woods around the house, and finally, it perched on an old fallen log. The soil nearby had been disturbed. I could see even with the leaves all over, and the crow was pecking at something. A faint spark of light. A soda tab, I realized. A soda tab with a bit of wire looped through it. The blood pounded in my ears so hard it was like a roar. A rushing waterfall cascading through my veins. I could hear nothing but the sledgehammer of my heartbeat, ringing through my ears like a gong, as I reached forward, a shaking hand, and pulled from the leaves Madison's charm bracelet. Then I squatted and began to dig through the soil with the crow perched just above me on the dead tree, watching me. Sudden cawing behind me, all around me, a series of short, sharp caws. The crow on the log, Agatha, opened her beak to cack at me and fluttered away.
Hey!
Ice slammed into my veins at the sound of the deep voice. I jumped, whirling around, and a rough hand grabbed me. The staring man. His eyes were hard, glittering, bluer than the sky. They might have been pretty eyes if they hadn't been so cold in his stubbled red face.
The hell are you doing on my property?
He demanded, hoisting me by the front of my shirt.
Help!
I screamed.
Help!
His gloved hand clapped over my mouth. I fought and squirmed, but it was no good. He dragged me back the way I'd come, toward the sagging front porch of his house.
Shut the hell up!
He yelled. At first, I thought he was yelling at me. Then I realized he was yelling at the crows. We were nearly at his front door when a very loud caw sounded nearby, and the man swore as a flutter swept overhead. His grip on me loosened, then released as he stumbled back to swat at something that flew right into his face. I scrambled and ran. Behind me, the man lunged for me. But the crows were darting in and out, dive-bombing him, and he tripped. I bolted all the way home. I got lost on the way, and for a little while was wandering in the woods. Finally, I made it to my house and burst in screaming at Mom and Dad to call the police. When I told the cops about the bracelet, they asked me to show them where. But the woods all looked the same to me when I led them back to Crandall's house. Without the crows, I couldn't find it. We searched all over. No bracelet. The officers seemed to think I was making the whole thing up. They did interrogate Crandall, He admitted he'd found me on his property digging through the leaves and said he'd grab me to try to bring me home. He also added that I was a nuisance and that he wanted a restraining order to keep me and other kids off his land. From the trees above, the crows watched, and they watched as my parents took me home. I locked myself in my room and cried into my pillow all night because nobody believed me, which meant Madison's disappearance would forever remain unsolved. To this day, her disappearance is a cold case. I never recovered the bracelet. Either it's still lost in the leaves, or Crandall disposed of it. I know that's not a happy ending. Like I mentioned at the beginning, no one believed me back then about the crows. Madison was right, though, about their gifts. The birds don't bring trash. They are very judicious in the gifts they select. And I know this because a couple days after the incident with Crandall, I was sitting outside, moping at her window, and the crows brought me a gift to make me feel better. I wiped the tears from my eyes and saw, through my blurry vision, that they'd left something on the sill. At first, it looked like a pair of misshapen marbles, each mostly white, with a splotch of blue bright as the sky. Long, red tails dangled from the gloppy things. And as my teary vision cleared, I gasped. Eyes. Human eyes. I flushed them down the toilet so the birds would not be blamed. Since then, I keep every one of their gifts, each precious charm worn around my neck, like a blessing. The summer sun beat down mercilessly as I wiped sweat from my brow. The rhythmic squeak of my sneakers against the asphalt echoed in the still air. Every muscle in my body screamed with exertion. But across the court, my younger brother, Daniel, looked fresh as a daisy. Our dad had just finished setting up the new basketball hoop, and all day it had been our own personal battleground. We played one-on-one, the score a constant dance between us. But if I'm being completely honest, I was losing most of the time. Daniel, at 17, towered over me by 5 inches. Every jump shot felt like I was shooting over a tall building. When the sun began to settle, and the mosquitoes started to bite our legs, our mother called us into the house. We retired into our home, the familiar creaking of the floorboards greeting our feet like an old friend. I sat down for dinner, the warm smell of Mom's meatloaf filling the air. But Daniel didn't join me. He darted straight to the bathroom like a shot rabbit, slamming the door shut behind him with a muffled thud. He was up to something. I could sense it. It wasn't just the mischievous glint in his eyes when Mom asked him where he was headed. "Just gotta use the restroom," he mumbled, his mouth pressed into a tight line in a desperate attempt to suppress a smirk. He always did that when he was doing something he had no business doing. That forced-down smile that never quite reaches his eyes. I dug into my meatloaf as if I hadn't seen food in a lifetime. There's something about playing outside all day that turns your stomach into a bottomless pit. Mom's smile flickered slightly across the table as she watched me devour my dinner.
How do you like it?
She asked, her voice laced with a hint of amusement I couldn't quite place. It's amazing. I mumbled, my mouth full. Truth be told, the meatloaf tasted a little off tonight. But I didn't care.
You already know what I'm about to ask.
She continued, her playful tone masking a knowing glint in her eyes.
May 22nd means only one thing, so don't even try to be slick about it.
A cold dread bloomed in my chest. Report card day. The weight of my math grade. A giant crimson F blooming on that final report card threatened to hurdle me in the inevitable, uncomfortable conversation with my mother. A confrontation that I'd much rather not have. Thankfully, Mom hadn't mentioned it earlier. It allowed me one last day to enjoy the summer. Because I already knew what failing the last semester of school meant. Summer school. But now, the thought of the conversation gnawed at me. Should I confess? Maybe facing her disappointment now would be better than the constant churning worry in my stomach. She knew I had the report card, so there was no point in trying to lie. I sighed, dropping my fork next to the bits of meatloaf I had left, and made my way to my room. As I passed the bathroom to get to my bedroom, a strange, quick sound erupted from inside the bathroom. It was a yelp. A sound you'd hear a hurt puppy make, but sudden and sharp. The yelp was followed by a horrifying double whammy of noise. A sharp snap, like a thick stick being broken, and then a deep, heavy thud. It sounded like something large fell, maybe even Daniel himself. The sound froze me in my tracks. My hand hovered near the bathroom door, listening intently. Silence. An unnatural, suffocating silence. Suddenly, my feet started to feel cold. A wet kind of cold. I looked down, and my breath hitched in my throat. Blood. Crimson tendrils of blood snaked out from under the bathroom door, swirling around my feet. Nausea churned in my stomach. Instinctively, I jumped back from the pool of blood, a primal scream ripping from my throat. The sound echoed through the house, shattering the silence. Moments later, my mother came careening around the corner, with my dad close behind, who was jolted awake by my scream. One look at the scene, and my mom's face drained of color. I didn't need to explain. I just stood there, frozen in a tableau of shock. My gaze glued to the blood seeping from beneath the bathroom door. Dad reached the bathroom door first, his hand instinctively going for the doorknob. It wouldn't budge. Locked. They both started pounding on the door, their voices raw with panic as they screamed Daniel's name. My dad shoved my mom aside. With a strong kick, he slammed his foot into the door. The hinges shrieked in protest, and the door caved inwards, swinging open with a deep thud. I was at an angle, unable to see what my parents were seeing, but the raw terror on my parents' faces spoke volumes. Mom crumpled to the floor, sobs racking her body as she screamed a name that wouldn't come out. Dad, his face etched with a grief so profound it seemed to age him in seconds. But unlike Mom, he remained standing. His composure, a dam, holding back a tide of unimaginable anguish. My dad walked into the bathroom but instantly came stumbling back out. As if whatever he was seeing, whatever had just happened to Daniel, was physically too much for him to keep looking at. He stumbled out of the bathroom, mumbling and crying incoherently. He choked on his words, the same horrifying question looping over and over from his mouth. What happened? Oh God, what happened? Driven by a morbid curiosity that warred with my terror, I inched towards the bathroom, grazing my back along the wall, trying to put as much distance between myself and the door as possible. My parents' reaction had planted a seed of dread, a chilling premonition that made me want to just turn around and run. But I needed to know what it was. What happened to my brother? I peeked inside, and a sight met my eyes that horrified me to my core. But what truly baffled me was how what I was seeing could even be possible. My brother's body was completely limp, sprawled on the ground like a doll. He lay face up, or rather, body up, because his head was torn from his neck. The skin of my brother's neck was marred by a jagged line of torn flesh, exposing the deeper layers of dermis and subcutaneous tissues. Arterial blood gushed from the open wound, spattering the surrounding areas in a macabre display of crimson. The neck bones, once hidden beneath layers of skin, fascia, and muscle, were exposed, their bony surfaces glistening with an unnatural white. The cervical vertebra, a twisted mass, their alignment grotesquely distorted, like a bowl of limp spaghetti. The veins hang flaccid and lifeless, their lumens empty, their contents spilled onto the ground. The tendons dangled like frayed strings, their connections to muscle and bone severed, their purpose now rendered useless. Suddenly, I noticed something in Daniel's hand. A bottle. Swallowing the fear of moving closer, the fear of stepping on my own brother's blood, I focused my eyes on this bottle, a desperate attempt to block out the horrific scene around me. In a total shot in the dark, I felt this bottle could mean something. Anything that could shed light on what just happened to my brother. I was desperate for answers. Ignoring the sharp sting of tears welling up, I grabbed the bottle from his lifeless hand. In that same moment, a bear hug engulfed me, and my dad swept me away from Daniel. He set me down outside the bathroom, the bottle still clutched tightly in my hand.
I need you to be brave for me, buddy.
My dad said, holding back the emotion in his voice.
We need to call the police right now.
Though my vision blurred with tears, I knew from his strained voice that he already knew explaining what happened to Daniel would be really difficult, because none of us knew what happened. The scene outside our house became a blur of flashing lights and shouting voices. A swarm of police officers descended, their movements practiced and urgent. Before I knew it, cold metal clicked around my wrists. The bite of the handcuffs, a stark contrast to the growing numbness in my brain. Murder. That was the accusation hanging heavy in the air. A word that felt utterly inadequate to describe the grotesque scene I'd witnessed in the bathroom. This was something else entirely. Something horrifying and inexplicable. They herded us all into separate squad cars, the silence broken only by the rhythmic whooshing of sirens. At the station, the sterile interrogation room felt like a world away from the chaos at home. Questions came rapid fire. What happened? Did we see anything? Did we know anything about the incident? My answers were a jumbled mess, a broken record replaying the same horrifying scene over and over. None of us could explain what had happened, only describe the aftermath, etched into our very souls. Police had no evidence against us, so we were eventually let go. The house became a morbid monument, sealed off with yellow police tape. Detectives swarmed the scene. Forensic teams followed, their task a grim cleanup of a horror we couldn't even begin to understand. We, the displaced remnants of a shattered family, moved to my Aunt Jeannie's house. The silence there was suffocating, a stark contrast to the cacophony of emotions within me. My mother retreated into a shell of grief, her voice a silent echo in the halls of her own memory. My father sought solace at the bottom of a bottle, the amber liquid a poor substitute for the son he'd lost. The world spun on its axis, oblivious to the gaping wound ripped into our lives. We were left to navigate the wreckage, each of us adrift in a sea of our own private hell. I found myself sitting alone in one of the spare bedrooms in my aunt's house. Sleep was a distant dream, replaced by a churning mix of fear and morbid curiosity. My eyes darted to the small bottle in my hand. The label on the bottle read Project Neurolash in bold black letters. Above it was an image, an eagle, its talons bound with blue and red ribbons, perched beneath a circle filled with 14 stars. The logo made me remember something. It had been a while, years even, but I knew exactly where I'd seen the image before. My dad never told us where he worked. His schedule was a chaotic dance of early mornings and late nights. But on the rare occasion I glimpsed him leaving, a glimpse of that very same logo on his work uniform. A cold dread snaked its way through me. The pieces were starting to fall into place. and the picture they painted was terrifying. The cool night air slapped me in the face as I stepped outside my aunt's house. The smell of stale cigarette smoke hung heavy in the air. Dad sat hunched in a rickety lawn chair. The flickering orange glow of the cigarette, the only light illuminating his face. It was a face I no longer recognized, etched with lines of worry and a dark despair I'd never seen before. Dad? My voice sounded rusty in the silence. He looked up with a start, his eyes red-rimmed and vacant.
Ugh.
He grunted, a single syllable that spoke volumes about his state. I took a deep breath, the small bottle in my pocket burning a hole through the fabric. There's something I found. My voice faltered.
What is it, son?
He took a long drag from his cigarette, the ember briefly illuminating the haunted look in his eyes. It was in the bathroom. I blurted. On the floor next to Daniel. Hesitantly, I pulled out the small bottle, my fingers trembling slightly. He snatched the bottle from my hand, his movements faster than I expected. The lines on his face seemed to deepen, etching a mask of raw terror. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, his eyes darted to the image of the logo on the bottle. Recognition dawned on his face, swift and brutal. The blood drained from his skin. It was as if a dam had burst within him, unleashing a torrent of raw terror. In that moment, I saw a truth so horrifying it took my breath away. Without a word, he bolted out of his chair, the metal scraping harshly against the concrete patio floor. His frantic movements echoed the tempest brewing behind his eyes, and a primal fear pulsed in my veins. The fear of a son witnessing the world shatter around his father.
Go inside, Sam.
He rasped, his voice tight with a barely concealed panic.
Everything's going to be fine. Just don't worry about this.
His words rang hollow, a stark contrast to the fear etched on his face. Don't worry about it? How can I not worry? Dad, what's going on? What happened to Daniel? He wouldn't meet my eyes. He simply turned his back on me, the bottle clutched tightly in his hand. His entire body seemed to vibrate with a suppressed energy.
I said go inside.
He repeated, his voice a low growl.
This isn't something you need to be involved in.
But as he spoke, I saw it. The flicker of helplessness, the tremor in his hand, despite his attempt to appear strong. The bottle clearly held a message far more terrifying than I could even grasp. And my dad, for reasons unknown, seemed to know something about it. He may have told me not to worry, but there was no way I could obey. The horrifying truth about my brother and the bottle I found had already begun to unravel the threads of my reality. Stepping back inside, the house seemed to swallow me whole. The air hung heavy with a suffocating silence. My mom remained in their shared room, a ghost of her former self. Medication now kept her tethered to the bed. A silent prisoner in her own body. The vibrant woman who used to laugh and scold us was gone, replaced by a hollow shell. Her mind, once sharp and witty, was a desolate wasteland. The image of Daniel, forever etched in her vacant eyes, was a constant reminder of the life ripped away from us. It was a picture I couldn't unsee, a silent scream, echoing in the emptiness that was my mother. Exhaustion finally claimed me. I stumbled to my own spare room and collapsed onto the bed, the tears I'd been holding back for so long erupting in a torrent. Hours melted into one another as I grieved, the raw ache in my chest an unwelcome companion. A hot shower helped wash away the grime, but couldn't cleanse the image of Daniel's body from my mind. It replayed on a loop. A horrifying scene I wished I could erase. Yet another image haunted me. The logo on the bottle. A stark reminder of my dad's work uniform. Sleep came eventually, a heavy thing dragging me under. But it was short-lived. I jolted awake, heart hammering in my chest. A dark silhouette stood in the room. My dad. The dim light softened his features, but sleep still clung to my vision. He leaned closer, his touch a feather-like kiss on my forehead. "I love you," he whispered, his voice thick with a hidden emotion. "Look after your mother." It was a plea, a burden he placed upon me. Then he was gone. A faint creak echoed through the house, the front door of my aunt's place, opening and closing with a soft thud. Had I imagined it all? The lingering warmth on my forehead told me otherwise. My father had been here, and the weight of his unspoken truth settled heavily on my shoulders. He was gone, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a chilling certainty. The logo, the bottle, his absence. They were all pieces of a puzzle, far more sinister than I could ever have imagined. That was 6 months ago. My father hasn't come back since. A few months after my dad left my aunt's house, my mother and I were finally permitted to return to our home. When the authorities deemed it safe for us to return, the blood stain was the first thing I noticed upon stepping back into the bathroom. It was a small, unyielding circle, a constant, silent reminder of the brother I had lost. Today, though, I found something. In my dad's office, hidden beneath a jumble of clothes, was a laptop. I'd been searching the house for answers, and I think I just found them. My fingers trembled as I navigated the dusty labyrinth of the laptop's files. Then, a single folder jolted me. No label. Just a stark black icon that sent a shiver down my spine. With a bated breath, I clicked it open. A torrent of cryptic files spilled onto the screen. Each named a whispered secret. One, in particular, snagged my attention. Project Neurolash. My mind raced back to the image of the bottle, the chilling logo etched into its surface. Curiosity, laced with a prickle of dread, propelled me forward. I double-clicked the file, and a wave of documents, images, and data flooded the screen. It was a rabbit hole. A digital vault, overflowing with classified information, research logs, internal memos, and chillingly detailed reports, all centered around a single, horrifying project. Neurolash. Panic clawed at my throat as I saw my father's name woven throughout the files. He wasn't just a researcher. He was deep in the heart of this clandestine operation, a key player in the development of a potent, government-sanctioned bioweapon. The documents explained that Neurolash, a weaponized toxin designed to orchestrate a symphony of suffering within its victim, uncontrollable muscle spasms racking the body, causing the neck and head to spin uncontrollably until the vertebrae tears, resulting in self-decapitation, paralysis, or worse, awaited those that got exposed to this pathogen. The reports detailed the potential for contamination, the ways this pathogen could infiltrate the body. But the most chilling section focused on the mechanism of action. Neurolash targeted the central nervous system, disrupting the dance of nerve signals. Its primary targets were the neck and spinal muscles, a strike designed to leave its victim a broken marionette, forever frozen in a grotesque tableau of pain. I then came across an email exchange between my father and an anonymous colleague. It was a message from my father to his colleague, expressing his desperate decision to protect his family. Subject: urgent. Neurotoxin missing.
Dear Ryan, my hands shake as I type this. The weight of my decision sits heavy on my chest. But my conscience is clear. The recent security breach at the lab made it horrifyingly clear. Neurolash cannot be contained. We're playing with fire, and I fear the flames are about to engulf us all. I've done something drastic. I've taken a small sample of the neurotoxin. Don't try to retrieve it. I've hidden it somewhere, but I won't leave it there for long, just until I can find a better place to hide it. I know you must think I'm betraying you, but my family, their safety is my #1 priority. Neurolash in the wrong hands is a nightmare beyond comprehension. This isn't about abandoning the mission. Consider it a desperate gamble, a chance to buy time, to find a way to dismantle this weaponized nightmare at its core, to expose the truth before it's too late. Please, Ryan, if you receive this, understand, you have a family too. Trust me, this is the only way to keep them safe. For now, silence is our only weapon. I'll find a way to contact you again. But for now, our families come first. Yours sincerely, John.
the realization pressed down on me. The bathroom, the twisted remains of my brother, the chilling bottle with its cryptic logo. All of it clicked into place. Project Neurolash. This government-sanctioned nightmare was the twisted answer, weaving through the tapestry of my brother's tragedy. My father, his disappearance wasn't random. It was the consequences of his actions, a desperate bid to shield us from the fallout of his own guilt. The email spoke of unimaginable consequences, and a terrifying picture emerged. My father, a man burdened by a secret so heavy it shattered him. Slamming the laptop shut, a single question echoed in the silence. Would my father ever come back home? Maybe someday, but a certainty settled in my gut. How could he? I mean, how could any man come back home after such a horrible and stupid mistake? The poorly hidden bottle, the neurotoxin it contained, it was all my father's doing. He brought this danger into our home, and it had taken Daniel from us. The image of my dad in my room that night at my aunt's house, as he told me to take care of my mother, his tear-filled eyes, his trembling hands. It wasn't just fear I saw then. It was guilt. The guilt of a man who failed to protect his family, who brought a deadly secret under our roof and hid it poorly, leading to the death of his own son, the death of my brother. My father hadn't vanished on a mission or run from punishment. He couldn't bear to face the consequences of his actions, the weight of his son's death hanging heavy on his conscience. He left, consumed by guilt, a self-imposed exile for the unforgivable mistake that tore our family apart. Business trips are dreadfully boring, especially in my line of work. The only good thing about them: hotels. The tedium of day-to-day dealings bookended with clean towels and a mint on my pillow. If I could live in one, I surely would. There's just something in the ambiance that soothes my soul, for lack of a better phrase. At least, that's how I felt until staying at the Covenwood Inn. It seemed like any other hotel at first. Typical floor plan, decorative arrangements, overly polite check-in clerk. It wasn't until I received my key card and ventured up to room 371 that I would notice a dissonance in the layout. Something amiss that broke up the usual hotel landscape. In my room, placed deliberately on the bed, was a sheet of paper. Restrictions, printed on official Covenwood Inn stationery. Room 371 Guidelines. 1. No television after 9 p.m. 2. Only accept incoming calls on the room phone. 3. Leaving your room between the hours of 10:30 p.m. and 1:30 a.m. is strictly forbidden. 4. At least 2 to an elevator at all time. Never go in alone. 5. No visitors. If there's a knock at the door, ignore it. 6. The minibar is for emergencies only. 7. The view is a lie. Don't trust it. Enjoy your stay. This was odd. I had never seen anything like it. Not once. In any of the hotels I'd stayed at in the past. Perplexed, I called the front desk for answers.
All rules are to be followed during your stay.
The clerk stated this plainly, as if he had uttered it 1,000 times before. I don't understand. What emergency would warrant the use of the minibar? Why can't I watch TV after 9? What does "the view is a lie" even mean? I was offered the same reply, spoken with the same tone as before, not unlike a recording.
All rules are to be followed during your stay.
And that was that. No answers, no explanation. Assuming it was some sort of strange hotel humor I was unfamiliar with, I threw the list on the bedside table and forgot all about it. Until later that night. As I laid in bed, watching the 10 o'clock news, something completely out of the ordinary happened. The reporter began scratching at her face, a little at first, but then a lot. Her motions became aggressive, and skin began peeling. Blood dripped from the wounds as she continued to relay her report without missing a beat. No one seemed to notice or react to her appearance. Eventually, she froze in place and stared at the camera. Then, a close-up of her face, grotesque and mangled. Her bloodied lips spread apart and offered an ominous statement. "Don't break the rules, Jack." I jumped out of bed, left my room, and ran downstairs. My voice echoed through the lobby as I barged over to the front desk. "What the hell is going on here?" The receptionist didn't so much as blink at my intrusion.
What can I help you with, sir?
I just watched a news reporter tear apart her own face and tell me, personally, to follow your bizarre hotel rules. Is this some kind of sick joke? He pointed at the wall clock behind him.
It's 10:18, sir. In room 371, there's no television past.
I grabbed him by the collar. I don't appreciate being toyed with. Continue this jest and there will be a call made to the authorities. Mark my words. I let go of him and stormed off, his monotone voice trailing off in the distance.
All rules are to be followed during your stay.
I returned to my room, shut the TV off, and laid down to sleep, pissed off but exhausted. Unfortunately for me, my slumber would be short-lived. I awoke later that night in a fit of sleep paralysis, pinned in place by my own body. At the foot of the bed, was a shadowy figure, whose features I couldn't quite make out in the darkness. A warmth overtook the room as it stepped over to my side. My heart began to race. Closer now, I could see it was a man, maybe in his 50s, well-dressed, gray mustache. He leaned over me and spoke with a disturbingly unnatural timbre. His voice echoed off the walls and met my ear with an inhuman cadence.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Jack. Are you enjoying your stay so far?
I tried to break free of my chemical restraints, but it was no use.
Where are my manners? I'm Garrett Covenwood, the owner of this here hotel. I like to greet my guests whenever I can.
He rested his hand on my arm. There was a stinging sensation where his skin met mine, but I could barely wince in response to the pain.
Follow the rules, Jack. If you don't, you're in for a bumpy ride.
All at once, the warmth dissipated, and the sound of my cell phone buzzing rendered me fully awake. I jolted to the sitting position, reclaiming my movement. The man was gone, and my arm was fine. Thank God, it was just a nightmare. I quickly grabbed my phone and answered. It was my boss, Coulter.
Hey, Jack. There's been a change of plans. Need you down in the lobby right away.
What? What for? I asked, somewhat groggily.
No time to waste. Hurry up.
I looked at the time. It was 12:36 a.m. I was forbidden to leave my room, according to the damned rules. I called the front desk. Listen here. I need to come down to the lobby and meet my boss. I don't care what your rules say. There better be no weirdness. You hear me? The sound of tapping away at a keyboard filled my ear.
Sir, our records show that your boss, Coulter Brumlock, is fast asleep in his room.
Confusion washed over me. In his room asleep? How would you even know that? Are you telling me there's no one in the lobby waiting for me?
No, sir. It's a slow night. Just me and the fern in the corner.
I hung up the phone and dialed Coulter's number. After 2 tones, he picked up.
This better be good, Jack. I was sleeping.
Coulter, you didn't just call a moment ago and ask me to meet you downstairs, did you? He let out a groggy sigh.
Of course not. What are you talking about? Can I go back to bed now?
Another wave of confusion struck. Sure. It was probably a wrong number or something. Sorry to wake you. Before hanging up, I asked him one last question. Say, you didn't get a weird list of rules from the hotel, did you?
No. Now let me sleep.
He hung up, and I sat there, contemplating things. Honestly, it felt as though I was hanging on to my sanity by a single fragile thread. I had told myself the images on the TV were the hotel's doing, but this couldn't be faked. Coulter and I had known each other for years. I knew his raspy voice anywhere, better than I knew my own. That was definitely him on the other line, but at the same time, it couldn't have been. It was, by all means, a mystery. The next day at work came and went. Before long, Coulter and I met back at the hotel where we dispersed to our separate rooms. What was once the highlight of any given business trip was now tainted by uncertainty. For a good, long while, I sat there in bed, still in my dress attire, perusing the list of rules on my bedside table. I couldn't make sense of them any more than when I'd arrived. But it had become abundantly apparent that something was going on. Something unexplainable. Part of me hoped it was the product of a tired mind, overworked, and succumbing to the side effects of exhaustion. But lies, even the ones we tell ourselves, only stretch so far. After undressing and climbing beneath the sheets for some much-needed rest, there was a knock at the door. Rule 5 came to mind. No visitors. If there's a knock at the door, ignore it. It felt silly, but I did as the rule demanded. Best to act with an air of caution, I thought. Better safe than sorry. The knocking, however, was soon followed by a voice. Coulter's voice. "Jack, are you in there? Your wife called me. Says she couldn't get through on your cell. Something happened to Leslie." My heart sank. Leslie was our daughter. I jumped out of bed, ran to the door, and opened it at once. Coulter walked in, visibly troubled. "What's going on? What happened to Leslie?" Coulter bore a look of deep concern. "Well, it's not good news." My heart was pounding. "Out with it already! What happened? This is my daughter we're talking about." He looked at me, almost teary-eyed. "Leslie's dead, Jack." All color vanished from the room. What air I had in me left my lungs in a single labored breath, as a steady stream of tears wet my face. Coulter put his hand on my shoulder. "There's more. Please, sit down." I fell to the bed, broken. "The truth is, Jack, you broke Rule 5. Now, I have to hurt you." His lips stretched into a wicked grin, and his body froze. He was as still as a statue. "Coulter? I don't understand." In a flash, his hands lunged and connected with my neck. With a viciously tight grip, he began squeezing the air out of my lungs. I tried to fight back, but his strength was overwhelming. I managed to get in a few jabs to his head, but it didn't seem to have any effect whatsoever. He forced me to the floor and continued to clench my throat, until finally I lost consciousness. In that moment, I truly thought I was a goner. I awoke in bed the next morning, alive and well. I quickly reached for my phone and noticed a text from Charlotte. Just put Leslie on the bus. She misses you terribly. So do I. Please be safe. We love you. I got out of bed and raced to the bathroom mirror. My neck was void of bruising. No signs of strangulation. I called Charlotte to be doubly certain. To my relief, Leslie was indeed fine, as alive as she was the day I left. It all just felt so real. Could it really have been a dream? Frazzled, I met up with Coulter and we drove to our next meeting. I could still feel his hands wrapped around my neck. I refused to make eye contact with him the entire day, and he noticed. What could I say without sounding certifiable? Hey, the hotel left me this weird list of rules to follow, and now I think I'm seeing things. Want to stop for coffee before you drop me off at the nearest hospital? No, that wouldn't bode well. Mild food poisoning from the sushi at the hotel bar was a far better excuse. Only a few more days of torment, then I could leave. That's what I kept telling myself. Little did I know, my next night there would be the longest yet. I awoke at 11:22 p.m., according to the blinking display of the alarm clock on the desk across the room. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed a faint orange light dancing on the wall, pouring in through a gap in the curtains. I pulled myself out of bed and walked over to the window to identify the source of the light. What I saw was absolutely horrifying. The hotel was ablaze, an enormous fire engulfing the ground floor. The flames grew and touched the glass in front of me before I had the nerve to turn away and make a run for it. In leaving my room, I yelled to warn the other guests.
Fire! There's a fire! We need to leave at once! We need to get out of here!
No one joined me in the hall. There was no sound at all coming from within any of the other rooms on the floor. Had everyone already evacuated? Was I the only one inside? I opened the first door in reach. It was unlocked. Inside was the reporter from TV, her face still dripping red, a blood stain on the carpet below.
You should have followed the rules, Jack.
I slammed the door shut and moved on. In the next room was Coulter. I watched him strangling a copy of me before his head turned and we locked eyes. He threw my lifeless body to the floor and started running to my position.
You can't hide, Jack.
I closed the door and ran to the next. This room contained yet another impossibility. The worst one yet. It was my wife and daughter, standing at the door. Their eyes were vacant, drained of all human emotion. I watched, astonished, as their skin burned to a crisp before my eyes. Charlotte spoke first. "We miss you terribly, Jack." Leslie chimed in after. "When will you be home, Daddy?" I couldn't escape them. These horrors were around every corner. In a last-ditch effort to run away from my troubles, I bolted to the nearby elevator. The button was jammed, but I kept pressing it. I looked down the hall to see the reporter, Coulter, my wife, and daughter, all walking towards me. Come on, work, you piece of crap, work! Finally, the button gave way and the doors opened. I hopped into the metal box and pushed the button for the first floor. The doors closed, just as the ragtag team of zombies closed the gap between us. I slid to the floor, on the verge of a heart attack. The ride down offered no solace, no lull in the supernatural calamity I faced. Without warning, the elevator dropped, plunging to the depths of the hotel, far deeper than I thought possible. I gripped the railing as tight as I could as the light wavered in and out of life. In between flickers, Garrett appeared before me.
You've broken almost every rule, Jack. This is what happens. You'll destroy us all if you're not careful.
He vanished. The light left with him. Knowing my death was fast approaching, I closed my eyes and thought of Charlotte and Leslie. I could see them playing outside in the rain on the day I left. It was always heartbreaking to say goodbye, and this would be no different. I held on to their memory and braced for impact. As the elevator neared the end of its descent, Garrett's booming voice entered my mind and broke the trance.
Wake up, Jack.
Jarred, my eyes opened, and I fell back, landing on the floor. The unique abrasiveness of carpet brushed against my skin. I was no longer in the elevator. Upon taking a deep breath and gathering my wits, the familiar surroundings set in. I had inexplicably been transported back to room 371. As I looked around in disbelief, happy to be alive, I noticed the list in my hand. Rule 7 was now circled. The view is a lie. Don't trust it. It took a minute to register, but I now knew what it meant. The view through the window. There was never any fire. It was just another ploy to get me to leave the room, and I foolishly took the bait. My eyes darted to the alarm clock on the desk. It was now 1:47 a.m., meaning it was now safe to leave. I needed to get the hell out of there, and fast. I stood up, marched to the door, and grabbed the knob. It was hot to the touch. Burning hot. I pulled my hand back instinctively to avoid the harsh heat. I then noticed the charred wood on the bottom of the door's frame, indicating fire. Real fire. But how? I thought the view had deceived me. I looked back to the list for answers and noticed a postscript scribbled in pen. You should have followed the rules, Jack. You did this. Now we all have to suffer. My eyes scanned the page for more clues, to no avail. They kept landing on Rule 7. In addition to being circled, it was underlined with a striking red ink. Why did my attention need to be drawn there? Was it just gloating, or something more? That's when it hit me. I walked over to the window and peered outside. The fire raged on outside my room, but the world below seemed unaffected. No flames, no firefighters, no one running out of the hotel. Just a plain parking lot, traffic on the main road, and trees in the distance. As normal a view as one could hope to expect from this particular vantage point. But the view was a lie. I tried opening the window, but an unseen force closed it shut on my fingers. I screamed and pulled them back. In a great deal of agony, I lifted the chair at the desk and threw it against the glass. It shattered, revealing the world outside for what it really was. I saw a fiery wall below and heard the guests screaming in peril. There was indeed a fire, and I truly was in danger. Still in pain, I picked up the list and looked at rule number 6. The minibar is for emergencies only. This was certainly an emergency. Without any time to waste, I opened the minibar next to the desk. Inside were no drinks or food. Only a small black box with a red button affixed to its surface. I pulled it out and placed it on the bed. There was now smoke seeping into the room through the outline of the doorway. Looking over the list again, there were no further instructions. Nothing at all pertaining to the box. There was only one course of action left to take. I closed my eyes and pressed the button as hard as I could, putting my life in its hands. Memories played in my mind like a film reel running in reverse. The day's events, followed by the previous, and so on. I relived all the fear and torment in a matter of seconds, until eventually my eyes opened and I found myself in line with Coulter at the front desk, waiting to check in.
This place isn't too shabby, Jack. Better than the last one, at least.
I can't explain how, but I was back in the hotel lobby on the first day of the business trip. The day we checked in.
Say, Jack, what happened to your hands?
I looked down and saw the bruises left by the window. Oh, it's nothing. Slam them in the car door, that's all.
Both of them?
He was cut off by the check-in clerk, greeting me. I was now at the front of the line.
Do you have a reservation, sir?
I stared at him for a while, remembering everything that happened. I then backed away from the counter and turned to leave.
Jack, where are you going?
Sorry, Coulter. I think I'm gonna get an Airbnb instead. I'll see you tomorrow. He waved his arms at me, frustrated, and then turned back to book his room. I heard the clerk handing him his key card before I reached the exit. Here you are, sir. Room 371, on the second floor. We hope you enjoy your stay. Shit.